Welcome to the BC Library Association's Summer Conference. This session is part of our 2020 virtual webinar series titled The Conversation Continues. BCLA is privileged to have our office and to be presenting the 2020 Summer Conference from the City of Vancouver, which is located on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We had an amazing program of speakers lined up for BCLA's 2020 annual in-person conference. And when we couldn't go ahead with that conference, we asked presenters if they would share virtually some of the fantastic ideas and work they had prepared for the in-person conference. This was an opportunity for BCLA to join with presenters to help with the professional learning in our library community. Thank you to all the presenters who were able to commit the time and effort to transforming their presentations into an online format. Today's session is presented by Michelle Blackwell and Wendy Traz. The session is titled Building Effective Strategic Communication Strategy for Library Initiatives. Michelle leads and supports branch-level communications and marketing projects for UBC libraries. She works with subject matter experts to develop media releases, communication campaigns, and editorial strategies to promote the value of the library and to tell the stories of its collections, services, and people. Wendy supports teacher education, students, graduate students, and faculty at the UBC Faculty of Education, and is one of the co-founders of the UBC Seed Lending Library, now in its third year of operation. Wendy is interested in the potential for non-traditional library collections to support community engagement and inquiry-based teaching and learning. Please join me in welcoming Michelle and Wendy, and let me turn it over to the two of you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Well, this is kind of thrilling. I think that I can speak for both of us, Wendy, when I say that this is our first presentation via Zoom and our first online conference. So this is pretty exciting, and hopefully we get our point across. So here goes. I think one of the things that we're hoping to share in today's session are some of the practices and strategies that we have found to be really effective in some of our collaborations at UBC Library, in the hopes that these strategies will be helpful to any library in any branch, any size, that these sort of general guiding principles will help really amplify collections or projects. And so we have a few sort of best practices to share that we think might be of help. Just to kind of kick us off, here's a bit of a rundown of how the communications team at UBC Library and librarians work together to work on some of these initiatives. And maybe I can just start by telling you a little bit about what the communications team at UBC Library does. We're a small team of 4 people who serve all 13 branches and units of UBC Library on the Vancouver campus. And essentially we function as a full service, one-stop shop communications and marketing agency. And we work in collaboration with librarians to help them put together strategies around communicating internally and to the campus community and wider public about projects, initiatives, new collections, new acquisitions that are happening. And if I can maybe just call your attention to the 3 bullet points underneath the communicators' roles here. We really rely on our librarians to bring us the stories and the projects that they're working on and that they really feel are of importance to them and that need to be amplified. And then we work with them to create strategic plans and to ensure that the stories and what we're sharing are framed in an appropriate way, that they're aligned with the UBC Library's new strategic framework, and that we're able to amplify them and ensure that they are shared more widely across campus and beyond. In terms of what our librarians are bringing to the table, Wendy, I'll let you take it away.
Sure, thanks, Michelle. So I'm imagining a lot of the people that are viewing this are actually librarians. So you probably have a good sense of what kind of work I do, but just to give you a little bit more information about my work, I'm an education librarian. I work at the Faculty of Education at UBC. It's quite a big faculty. So there are about 750 teacher candidates that come through the program every year. And there are quite a number of graduate programs on offer as well, including master's or MEd degrees available, PhDs or EdDs available. So as a result, I've become pretty aware of a lot of the priorities and the developments with regards to K-12 education, curriculum, pedagogy, all those kinds of things. And I've been really fortunate to work with faculty that are interested in teaching in innovative ways. So when we started the Seed Lending Library, which we started a few years ago with a colleague of mine, Helen Brown, who works out of the Woodward Library, which is a science library here on campus. And our goals were we definitely knew we wanted to involve communications from the get-go because we knew there was a story there, but we weren't really sure how to create that story. So yes, that's how we worked with our goals. Our goals for the collection were to launch a brand new, non-traditional seed lending library collection so that people would come in and it would be kind of a community hub. It would be a site for teaching and learning. And we just thought that was going to be a great story, but we had no idea how we were going to do that on our own. So very fortunate to have a communications team with us.
Thanks, Wendy. So when Wendy and her colleagues came to us with this goal and this sort of hope, what we then did is went back and put together a strategic plan to really try and help them achieve those goals. And the plan we'll get into in a little bit, but I think maybe the most important thing that we want to highlight are 5 ingredients that underpin really every good promotional campaign at the library and beyond. Frankly, these are sort of communications and marketing best practices. And those are that the promotion or the campaign plan is driven by data-driven decision-making, that we're mapping results to institutional goals, both at the library level and also at the institutional or university level. Strategic timing is really key, and leveraging relationships with key partners. And then finally, an effective spokesperson. And I think one of the things we're really proud of about this campaign and what we've done is that we really used all of these tools. And I think that's really what lended to the success of the campaign. So I think in keeping the Seed Lending Library sort of a case study of these 5 underpinnings, we can get started on the first one, which is mapping results to institutional goals.
So just a little bit of context for those of you that are not so familiar with what the University of British Columbia is all about, or at least one little tiny part of it. There's a lot going on here. We really thought, Helen and I really believed that there was fertile ground for developing a seed lending library at UBC. There's a number of components already existing. So the UBC farm is a 24 hectare working farm associated with the Center for Sustainable Food Systems in the Faculty of Land and Food Systems. We worked with them and were able to secure some ongoing donations of seeds from them. There's also the iSchool at UBC, which is where new librarians are born, I suppose. So we're very lucky to be able to work with student librarians, and we knew that they would be able to play an important role in helping us establish the collection by working with us in a professional experience capacity. UBC is also in its own right a little town. There's an extensive series of neighborhoods with faculty and staff housing, as well as obviously graduate student housing and undergraduate student housing as well. And there's a series of community gardens throughout the neighborhoods. And so we knew that there were avid gardeners on campus that might want to take advantage of this service as well. There are also, if you can believe it, 2 elementary schools on campus and 1 secondary school on campus. And we knew, or we thought that perhaps teachers and other educators, local educators, may want to come to campus not too far away and get seeds to support things like outdoor learning and gardens in the classroom. And, you know, with all of this, as I mentioned too, trends in education involving outdoor education is very popular right now. Experiential learning is very popular right now. So it just seemed like a lot of different components were aligning to make this useful in our context. And in terms of the opportunities that we saw, there were a number of different benefits to this collection, including the fact that it's a non-traditional collection that supports teaching and learning. It's also a really nice opportunity for us to work across campus. I don't often get a chance to work with my science librarian colleagues, so that's been a nice opportunity. And it's also, the Seed Lending Library promotes health and wellness and through food security and gardening and being outside and lifelong learning and that sort of thing. So there are lots of benefits, but for us in terms of framing the story, we really wanted to make sure that it was aligned with our institutional goals. And for the library, we've just launched a new strategic framework. And of the 5 strategic directions that are meant to be guiding our work, community engagement is one of them. So engage with communities is one of the strategic directions that we are focusing on. And we think that the Seed Lending Library fits really nicely in that category. And I just want to mention a couple of bullet points underneath the community engagement strategic framework plan. This means, you know, we interpret this to mean making resources widely available to our community members. It means enriching the quality of life for our local communities. And it means encouraging lifelong learning. And we really thought that all of these things could be achieved through the Seed Lending Library. Back. Oh yeah. And so the second component, when we spoke with Michelle early on in the process, we were so eager to get her assistance with this work. She said, don't do anything yet except collect data, because we want something that we can talk about in a couple of years. We want something to point to. Where are the benchmarks? What are the impacts? What is the progress that you've made over the years? Unfortunately, the communications team provides templates for reports. So this on the left-hand side there, you can see it's just a snapshot for an annual report that I put together for the Seed Lending Library. And in this report, I outlined the goals that we had and some example of the impact and how we've achieved those goals. So we collected information such as, you know, how many people came to our events. We have one really big event every year at the local community center. How many people have come? Are those numbers going up or down? We also wanted to collect information about the kinds of seeds that are going out and the kinds of seeds that are being donated back into the collection. So those infographics on the right, those little visualizations give you a sense of what's been most popular going out and coming back in. And we also collected information, some testimonials from people who use the collection, just sharing thoughts about what it means to them in terms of making connections with their neighbors, learning something in a low-risk environment, those sorts of things. So this information, I think, was helpful to move the story on to the next steps.
Super. I guess this is where we talk about strategic timing. So Wendy is absolutely right. When we first had this conversation, we were sort of at the very beginning of things. And one of the things that we recommended at the very beginning was to approach promotion of this particular collection and service in a sort of phased way. And so phase 1 was really getting the collection off the ground, ensuring that people were aware of it, providing some tools to increase awareness at sort of a grassroots level, but to hold the really public-facing component of the outreach until a little later, when we actually had some data and some testimonials to use. And we know, just based on data and how some of our stories in the past have performed, that when you have sort of you have proof, I guess, of impact, when you have data to show, when you have testimonials of how a collection has helped with teaching and learning or helped foster community and engagement, it tends to be a fuller, richer story, and we see more engagement around it and also more amplification. And so phase one involved putting together sort of some templates in order for Wendy and her colleagues to share about the Seed Lending Library, what it was, how it was available to users, sort of at a branch level. And then we reconnected, I think almost a year later, and put together a more sort of fulsome public-facing campaign. And this involved a larger editorial story that's outlined here on your right, some social media outreach. We also did some targeted media pitching to some student publications and some sort of community outlets here on campus at UBC. Once we sort of established that phased approach, we also decided that for the public-facing part of this campaign, that it be timed for October. And the reason why we did that is that we got some really fantastic guidance from Wendy that October was when gardens go to seed. And so it was sort of a perfect opportunity for us not only to talk about the lending library, but also provide people with an opportunity to donate seeds and collaborate in a way that was really immediate. And the other thing is that we know that October is just a really highly engaged time of year on campus, both for students and faculty, as well as staff and community members. So we could have perhaps shared this in the summer, which is also gardening season, but we know just based on attendance and the sheer population on the UBC campus that fall was really a great time to take advantage of that sort of optimum engaged audience. Cool. So relationships with key partners. This is really critical, I think, both in the establishing of the Seed Lending Library itself and also in its promotion. So Wendy, maybe I'll let you weigh in on how these partnerships started to begin with.
Sure. So I'll start with the University Neighborhoods Association, which is on the right there. So the University Neighborhoods Association is the local organization that manages all of the community gardens, plus community centers and all kinds of community programming as well. They offer an annual grant called the U-Town at UBC grant. It's a small grant. You can get up to $1,000 for projects that foster community engagement and social activation. So we applied for and received this grant, which was instrumental in getting us some funding to fund some community events and some seeds as well. And so we've gotten that grant for 3 years in a row. And so through the process of applying for that grant, of course, our project was on their radar, and they were really engaged, especially in the first year. They filmed a promotional video about the new collection, which is also, of course, to promote the grant. And that video through the UNA social media channels got over 10,000 views. So it was really nice to partner with that organization that was already very eager to promote the work that we were doing. And they've continued to be a very key partner throughout the years, continuing to work with us. We now have a pretty collaborative spring event, an Earth Day event that we work very closely with them on to reach out to our community. So that's been a very successful partnership and a direct line to the community. Obviously, some of the other partners that were very important are the Faculty of Education. It's been nice, obviously, to work with faculty that are interested in teaching with seeds and doing rogue gardening and learning to do math with seeds and learning about environmental sustainability and everything. And so through those connections, we were able to tap some of those and say, listen, would you mind contributing some thoughts to this piece we're putting together? And then, of course, I know you have some other, I'll pass it back to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Wendy. So yeah, all of these connections that were sort of established by Wendy and are already held by librarians on campus were really critical to us in terms of amplifying the story that we'd created and allowing it to be shared beyond sort of the bounds of the library. so it was really critical that we had a voice from the Faculty of Education who was able to actually weigh in, and we quoted her in the story specifically around how she was using the seed lending library in her teaching. We also, thanks to Wendy, were able to talk to a student who was using the seed lending library in her own gardening and how that was sort of contributing. So that really helped to flesh out the story and create a really well-rounded story and really illustrate the impacts in a very practical and real way in terms of the value of the seed lending library to the UBC community. We also leveraged our partnerships with my communications colleagues on campus. So there are communications folks who work for the Faculty of Education, the Faculty of Science, the University Neighborhood Association, and Central Broad and Marketing at the University of British Columbia. And it was great to be able to send along a toolkit to them and ask for that support to help us really share the story on a larger, wider level, as many of them have a larger reach than we do. And so it was fantastic to work with them to really get this out in front of the right eyeballs. Often, one of the things I wanted to mention is often with a project that's exciting as this one, it's often really tempting to want to create a bunch of new channels specifically for that project because it's exciting and you want people to know about it. And one of the things I always sort of counsel folks to think through before you do that is just really think through the amount of work and energy it will require for regular content to be shared from that channel. It's often a great deal of work and preparation and takes a lot of planning. What we've found to be more successful is working with other channels and partners on campus to leverage their pre-established audiences and get our content out in front of them. I think if we'd created something brand new for the seed lending library, it would have been a great deal of work to keep an active social media channel open. And I think, and we would have been building our following from scratch by putting our content in front of and channeling it through pre-existing channels that have their own engaged audiences already. We were really able to leverage their audiences and engagement to, I think, sort of elevate this story to a higher level than we might have been able to do on our own. Super. So finally, I think often this is the most important ingredient, is an effective spokesperson. And we were really lucky to have Wendy as our spokesperson for this particular project. To give you an idea of how we work together with librarians here at UBC, we provide I guess what we would call media training. And this looks sort of a bunch of different ways, depending on what the project is. But essentially it can be anything from pretty sort of in-depth and detailed coaching around how one might answer questions or do an interview about a particular project like this. Sometimes it's as simple as sort of an informal conversation, just sort of thinking through what we would like these, what the key messages are for this particular project, to ensure that we're really getting our point across and that we're framing things in the way that we want them to be written or the way we're hoping the story is going to be told. I think an effective person has sort of three components that really makes them effective. The first is just knowing your audience. So of course, the way Wendy might have spoken about the seed lending library to a major national media outlet is different than how you might approach an interview with a student newspaper, for example, which is what we were able to achieve with this particular project. We managed to secure a really terrific interview about the seed lending library in the UBC, which is UBC student newspaper, which is on your right. The second is really understanding the story and angle before we get into pitching and deciding that at the outset. And as Wendy mentioned earlier, we really knew from the beginning that we wanted to frame this and emphasize the community engagement component of this particular story. And so we wrote the story with that in mind, and we also pitched to media with that in mind. And having that established at the outset, I think, helped to make us successful in that. And then finally, just having some key messaging ready. And what this often means is just 2 to 5 often bullet points that really succinctly encapsulate what you want to get across in an interview or a conversation. And it seems so sort of intuitive and obvious, but taking the time to really think this through, I think, can really make or break a media story or an interview, so that you're really able to frame things in the way that you want and communicate all of the most important kernels that you really want to get across to your interviewer. And luckily, Wendy and I were able to have a great informal conversation before this particular interview. And I think it was worth our while. Yeah.
I would say so, Michelle. We were chatting before the presentation and I said, I need to tell you how vital that training was. As Michelle says, it seems simple, but the brief conversation that she and I had to really emphasize, you know, we wrote down 3 bullet points. What are the key messages? And, you know, try saying them a few times during the interview. Sometimes it's also a matter of, is the interviewer picking up on your key messages? You know, I do a lot of workshops. I feel like I'm quite comfortable in front of different audiences, but I think media training is a bit of a different skill set. So that meeting and those steps that we went through was so helpful.
And I think, you know, I realize that not every librarian has a communications person or media training at their disposal. But, you know, that doesn't need to deter you. Sometimes just practicing with a colleague or a friend in advance, or, you know, filming yourself and rehearsing it. Sometimes it can, I know that it can feel a little hokey, but just sort of working out the kinks in advance, I think, can really, improve sort of your confidence and feeling like you're ready to take on an interview and get your point across. The other thing I want to mention as well is often if you're seeing an effective spokesperson, chances are it seems almost effortless. You know, they're a subject matter expert and they're speaking eloquently on a subject that is near and dear to them. But often what I found in my years of working with professionals of all librarians and beyond is that often the easier and the more effortless the response, the more preparation and energy and time was actually spent in preparing for that. And so I just want to urge folks to, you know, it is worth carving out 30 minutes to really think through something through. I think you'll be really happy with the result. And ultimately, you know, doing that interview or working with media becomes an enjoyable experience instead of something that's sort of scary and daunting. So I think a little bit of preparation goes a long way, and an effective spokesperson is so important for all of our collections and initiatives. I think that brings us to the end of our presentation. I think one of the main things that we wanted to share is that if you have any questions or anything, both Wendy and I are absolutely open to questions via email. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with either of us for questions or comments or anything you'd like to share with us.
Yes, and thank you for joining us. I'm happy to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Both. That was really interesting and really informative. Really enjoyed it. So let me just formally say thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Wendy, for sharing your expertise with BCLA members and with the larger library community. We look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon. But until then, please stay safe and healthy and stay connected. And for those of you watching today, please visit the BCLA website, www.bclaconnect.ca, for information about additional virtual sessions coming in the BCLA Summer Conference. And we can also, if you'd like, post some contact information for both Michelle and Wendy, making it really easy for you guys to find them. So again, hope to see you at the next Summer Conference session. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Annette.